Welcome to the 22nd of August, 2025. We're going to get into your real estate update. Today we're going to talk about the final steps of completing an escrow when you're buying a piece of real estate, a property, condo, townhome, single family residence. Right when you get to the end, we talked about the entire process for buyers, pretty detailed. You can find all of that information at santaclaritaopenhouses.com/blog. Now, when you go there, you'll see various videos, but each part of the process has been highlighted. But now we're to that point right after you do what's known for a buyer as a verification of property condition. You walk through at the very end. You're verifying that the property is being delivered to you, and there haven't been any changes. Everything is as you had expected. This is going to include looking at what the seller said they were going to do, maybe looking for excessive trash being in the house, looking for those little items that were promised as part of the contractual agreement between yourself and the seller. And your agent should have a checklist, especially if you ask the seller to repair, fix, or replace particular items, and they had some kind of a standard that you had asked the seller to try to get to. In other words, basically don't have your Uncle Bob do it. You have a licensed, bonded, certified, experienced, knowledgeable, whatever, perform the work and then provide receipts. Sometimes those receipts are given, and this is a good rule of thumb, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday because that's what I covered. Today we're actually going to be covering the final funding and then the recording of the property, when you're going to get those keys. But back to this, as you're working on that part of the process, it's not a bad idea to maybe get those receipts and proof that work was done even before that final walkthrough. And you can have your agent write that up, and most seasoned agents understand this. Give it a week or 10 days prior to closing so you know the work's being done. If you do that final walkthrough and it wasn't done, then there's a problem, because now you're going to stop that process. And now the other agent and their buyer has to scramble. Not that they wouldn't have been paying attention to this as if it were their only transaction, but in some cases people drop the ball. So just building in that extra time for comfort is super important. And we do a lot of that with real estate, especially when we're dealing with so many other entities involved in the process. All right, so let's talk about the money moving and funding. In your agreement, in your original contract, you're probably going to have some kind of communication that discusses when the property is going to close, and then when you're going to take possession. And then maybe after it actually closes, they're going to offer the buyer, or the seller, a couple, 2 or 3 days to move out. Not a couple, 2 or 3 days, but 2 or 3 days to move out of the property. If that's the case, great. Then your possession will be, after that time finishes, at around 5 p.m. 5 p.m. is what's typical in contract. Now, that number can be modified with mutual agreement from both parties. And why would you give the sellers a couple days to move out? Well, that gives you extra time to get utilities switched over, which is incredibly important. In fact, you want to do that for the date of closing. And also occupancy. You're going to have to kind of work that out with your agent, see what that market's like. And also by that time, you'll have an idea. You don't want to sign off on moving utilities over at the moment of closing if the seller's going to be having possession of the property, if you're concerned that the seller's going to run the water for 2 24-hour periods and then get you a $700 water bill. I don't know who would do that, who would be mean like that, but you have to just pay attention to those time frames. In addition, when you're finishing that escrow, you're going to want to have called the utility companies. So electricity, gas, water, cell phone, or telephone. I don't even think anybody does that anymore. But what I mean is internet. You want to find those particular providers and find out if there's any kind of, you'll be able to save yourself what they call a reconnection fee. It's just extra money, but they have to send out a person, I guess, to read the meter and switch things over. If you're able to assume and move your name into that utility ownership, and do that on a specific day after the seller has already issued a notice to cancel, then typically you won't have to pay that extra fee, and it could be a lot of money. So you don't have to pay that extra fee. So whenever you get closer to the end of escrow, that's just something else to consider. Make sure that you get those utilities transferred. In some cases, if the seller hasn't done their due diligence, hasn't called to let the utility company know that they're selling their house and they're moving, in some cases you as a buyer will be able to call up, and that's why it's critical to know when you're actually going to be closing, so you can have those utilities moved over at that particular time, so you're not paying any of the seller's utility bill. Anyway, so gauge that out. Now, when it comes to closing, like I said, if there's been a couple days granted to the seller, thank you very much. I'm sure most sellers truly appreciate that. Even if they're close to being out, it's just makes it not as complicated and not as stressful. Real estate is completely stressful all across the board, but this will help them out. In addition, let me let you understand this, the money, when you're going to be buying a house and it comes time to actually close, the money moves one day, closing moves the second day. So if you happen to be closing on a Tuesday, let's say they say Tuesday's when it's going to close, when it's going to record, then Monday typically is going to be the day that the money moves. It gets funded. So it goes through the title company, money gets funded from your lender, the money makes it to where it needs to be, and now the second day is when it actually records. On that second day, the time of recording could be anywhere from, banker's hours, 9 to 5. And what usually happens is the escrow company is going to be notified by title when an actual person had this property recorded at the county recorder's office into your name as the buyer. So congratulations. Now the house is in your name. Now, if you have an agreement that the seller's already moved out and you can take possession at any time after confirmation, that's not uncommon, and that's kind of cool. So you don't have to wait until the contract says 5 p.m. because you've already worked it out. You'll be able to take possession right after confirmation has been received. So that's fantastic. If you're giving the seller an extra couple days, that's great too. Maybe they'll be out early on that next day, but usually those days end at 5 p.m. So that's when the key's going to take place as far as being given to you. Now, some of the things to look for after this closing process, if you have like a group mailbox in the neighborhood, you want to make sure you have keys, you know exactly which mailbox it is, because typically they're not labeled by house number. They usually just have some number that's associated with the house. But unless you've communicated or understand that from the people selling the house, you might not know what that number looks like, and then you just got to track down the postman as they come. Here's another thing, changing your address. I've sold quite a few properties where within the last couple weeks, even before the repair requests were negotiated, that the seller was starting to get basically mail from in the name of the buyers buying the house. A lot of sellers don't like that, especially when we're still in the middle of negotiation. It almost looks presumptuous, and it bothers them. So that's something to look out for. Maybe don't get your change of address completed a lot sooner than the closing date, because it does make people a bit nervous. And then, of course, now, you're going to have to, if it doesn't work out and the seller doesn't do whatever you're asking with regard to request for repair, or you can't negotiate it, or whatever it may be, but you decide to cancel escrow, now you have to change your address again. There's still going to be overflow. The post office isn't a completely seamless black or white 0 or 1 operation. They're still going to get mail for a while, and that just gives everybody a headache. So make sure you do your change of address at the appropriate time. Understand what that mailbox number is. Now they should give you keys to everything. There should be keys to the locks. In some cases, they had a lock changed 20 years ago and they don't even use that lock anymore, so they misplaced the key. They don't have the key, and that's fine. That might be something that you can preemptively strike on and basically say, we want to make sure that the sellers have keys to all the locks. That can be part of your negotiation. Also, garage door openers, it seems like 1 is usually the norm, even though there should be 2 if it's a 2-car garage. Not should be, you would expect there to be. Don't just expect it. Maybe you should have your agent fire off some kind of an email, asking about the number of garage remotes, so you know. In addition, there should be other stuff. If it's a homeowner-controlled residence, as far as the neighborhood goes, and they have a community pool, there's probably going to be some access device to get into the pool or the clubhouse or the gym or those sorts of things. Those can get expensive, especially if it's an HOA issued item. It could be $200 or $300. There could also be a deposit on top of that. So make sure you're getting all of these little devices as well. When your agent goes and they're going to look at the property, maybe they're going to make sure that all those items are there. Make sure that they get a picture of what was left. A few deals ago, I got a call from the agent representing the buyer saying that the seller didn't leave the fob or any of this other information. It almost gave an appearance like the buyer was trying to go to deep pockets, because everybody says the agents have deep pockets, go to deep pockets and try to get a few $100 out of me to pay for this pool fob that they said wasn't at the property. Well, I specifically remember the seller giving me that pool fob, and I specifically remember having it on the countertop organized with all the other items: garage door openers, extra keys, pool fob, mailbox key, these sorts of things. So it was all there, and I had them labeled on the back of a one of those cardboard, a piece of cardboard that you might find a whole bunch of cans of soup in. So I wrote those down. That's all I had at the time, so I wrote it down, organized there. But I did take a picture, and when the agent hit me up and said the sellers never got one garage door opener and then the fob, and they're expecting me to pay for it, and the fob costs $400. They're willing to accept the fact that there was only one garage door opener. There was only a single garage door, but anyway, it doesn't matter. I went ahead and sent them the picture, and I never heard from them again, because that's what I left at the property the day of closing. And that's important to make sure you have all those little items, because after it closes, it almost seems that sellers kind of forget caring. And in some cases, sellers are difficult to get in contact with, even from their agents. A lot of times they just kind of disappear into the yonder, and you don't have any connection with them any longer. It happens in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to issues buyers are bringing up after. Hence a home warranty, why that's so incredibly important, trying to get a seller to do something after without, barring trying to sue somebody. That's a whole different animal. But just trying to get them to do it because it's the right thing. Yeah, the right thing seems to fail a lot of the time. But that's how closing works, and congratulations, you're now the new homeowner. And hopefully you already did everything else I talked about in your investigations, checked out the neighbors, ran the property through the crime computer system, found out who's who, and did all of your other due diligence when it comes to purchasing real estate. You're going to be in the house a while, so it's good to at least know who you're living around and other things that might not be visible to the naked eye. A few more investigations. Anyway, I appreciate you watching today. As far as the update goes, we'll pull this down real quick. So this is the last 7 days of real estate activity. We have 10 coming soon, 76 new listings. We have 84 properties that have had their prices changed, 35 properties back on market. If any of these numbers jump out at me, I'll always mention that. Pending 42, active under contract 31, 62 closed this week, pretty good. 12 expired, 19 canceled, 21 put on hold, 10 are withdrawn. That's a lot to be put on hold. A lot of times the on hold field would indicate that there are multiple offers on properties, and the agents are going to attempt to respond to everybody, so they're going to hold up the process. That's really not the reason that status should be used. But if you're looking at real estate, you've written an offer on something, all of a sudden it disappears, just reach out to your agent and say, hey, listen, that house I wrote the offer on, I haven't heard anything, and I'm sure your agent hadn't heard anything, or they'd be communicating with you right away. But it's no longer visible on the websites I'm looking at. And they'll let you know more than likely the property probably has been put on hold, or it could have been put in pending as well, meaning the seller's just selected an offer and said, we're going to go all in on this. We believe it's going to finish and close. All right, that's your day. I'm Connor with Honor. When you're ready, reach out to me. You want to get me on a call, we can discuss your real estate plans. Zoom me, scv.com. So this will be changed to today, 8/22. You're going to get an irritating pop-up. Sorry about that. And there's the video from yesterday. And you go down here, you'll be able to book, jump on my calendar, and then we'll be able to have a discussion about your real estate needs, what you're looking to do. We can work it all out, whether you're buying or selling something. Just jump on here, and I would love to take great care of you. I do appreciate your call. I appreciate you watching. That was a call. I appreciate you watching, and we will see you in the next one.